Deleted Session, April 15, 1981. Now, continuation, apropos of Ruber and the sinful self. Ruber found great comfort in the church as a young person, for if it created within its members the image of a sinful self, it also, of course, provided a steady system of treatment, a series of rituals that gave the individual some sense of hope the sinful self could be redeemed. As in most of Christianity's framework, through adherence to certain segments of Christian dogma. When Ruber left the church, the concept of the sinful self was still there, but the methods that earlier served to relieve its pressures were no longer effectively present. The concept was shifted over to the flawed self of scientific vintage. Science has no sacraments. Its only methods of dealing with such guilt involve standard psychoanalytic counseling, which itself deepens the dilemma, for counseling itself is based upon the idea that the inner self is a reservoir of savage impulses, period. Ruber's creative nature early began to perceive at least that man's existence contained other realities that were deeper. Some of this is difficult to separate. To leave the church, say, meant to carry still some of the old beliefs, but without the band-aid that earlier offered some protection. He began to search actually from childhood in a natural fashion towards some larger framework that would offer an explanation for reality that bore at least some resemblance to the natural vision of his best poetry. I have said before that many creative people, highly gifted, have died young in one way or the other because their great gifts of creativity could find no clear room in which to grow. They became strangled by the beliefs of the cultural times. In that regard, Ruber's creativity kept struggling for its own growth and value fulfillment. His psychic recognition or initiation represented a remarkable breakthrough, meant to give him that additional psychic room that would ensure the continued expansion of the abilities of the natural self. The sinful self concept is a personal for each who holds it, but it is also projected outward onto the entire species, of course, until the whole world seems tainted. At the time the sessions began, the world was beginning to seem senseless, truly incomprehensible, to anyone who held any sense of poetry or sanity. Your private lives were showing their own difficulties, and the national situation was horrendous. Ruber's creativity broke through those frameworks to provide Alsatians and to release the psychic abilities that had earlier been nearly but not completely repressed. His poetry acted in some regards as a stimulator. That breakthrough, you might say, with perhaps some exaggeration, was a lifesaver, for without some such expansion, Ruber would have felt unable to continue the particular brand of his existence. It is not possible to say in words what one person or another looks for in life, or what unique features best promote his or her growth and development. Even two planes of the same kind sometimes require completely different treatments. The sessions then opened the door to a particular kind of value fulfillment that was natural to Ruber's being. Now, to some extent, it was that poor, unhappy, sinful self, a psychological structure formed by beliefs and feelings, that was also seeking its own redemption, since even it had outgrown the framework that so defined it. I have said that in almost every case of severe dissatisfaction or illness, the underlying reasons will not so much be found in the discovery or expression of buried hate or aggression. Though these may be present, but in the search for valued expression of fulfillment that is for one reason or another being denied, Ruber broke through both psychically and creatively. That is, the sessions almost immediately provided him with new creative inspiration and expression, and with the expansions needed psychologically that would help fulfill his promise as a writer and as a mature personality. He was still left, however, with the beliefs in the sinful self, and carried within him many deep fears that told him that self-expression itself and spontaneity were highly dangerous. In that regard, you have what amounts to a creative dilemma. It is one thing to say that the dilemma is unfortunate, but it is also true to say that the dilemma existed because of a breakthrough that gave him what amounted to a new life at the time. As he became better now, so it seemed greater demands were put upon him. Another image of the self comes into consideration, so that it seems to him that he is expected to be nearly a saintly self, or at least that he is regarded as someone who is expected to perform in an altogether superlative fashion, almost a super self again, an excellent television personality, an accomplished healer, and clairvoyant and writer and teacher to boot. In the light of this discussion now, that self was as unrealistic at its end of the spectrum as the sinful self was the other. For Ruber felt that he was supposed to demonstrate a certain kind of superhuman feat, not only managing on occasion to uncover glimpses of man's greater abilities, but to demonstrate these competently at the drop of a hat, willingly at the request of others. At the same time, he believed he was the sinful self, and that expression was highly dangerous. So between those two frameworks, the psychological organization, he operated as best he could, still seeking toward the natural fulfillment that was his natural heritage. The super self-image itself seemed to condemn him, of course, since he felt he could not live up to it, and therefore along the line, somewhere both the super self and the sinful self became in their ways joined, or at least allied. Through all of that, Ruber, of course, looked for further creative developments and intuitive breakthroughs, for, again, he needed more room. In the meantime, since he was older, and in the light of our sessions, it seemed to him that he must have outgrown many of the beliefs of early childhood, and that he must have enough perspective so that those earlier feelings and fears no longer applied. They were highly unpleasant. With his mother dead, it seemed highly unsporting to cast, for example, any aspersions or express fresh anger against injustice. In the meantime, his own understanding was growing, and his creative capacities. In my book, we rather elegantly pinpointed those precise problems that have so tainted your world, and in God of Jane, Ruber made an excellent attempt to uncover the nature of the sinful self and to outline the dilemma. Now, those books were the result of value fulfillment and creativity. They were necessary projections of understanding and growth. They were also bound to bring the entire concept into light, to bring the problem to the surface. Ruber therefore encountered new bouts of symptoms that effectively demonstrated and mirrored the feeling of lack of mobility. Again, he needed room to grow. The psychic abilities and the creative abilities, nearly impossible to separate. themselves provide all of the help that he requires. But the concept of the sinful self prevented him from using those abilities sufficiently. For how can the expressions of the sinful self be trusted? So we must now show Ruber the source of the sinful self to begin with, and convince him that such is not his natural self at all, and to do so we will to some extent at least go into his early background. The main thrust, however, will be the need for expression and value fulfillment that to one extent or another has always been impeded by the beliefs inherent in the entire sinful self-concept. A point. The answer does not lie, for example, in deciding not to finish my book. Rob noted dreams, evolution, and value fulfillment. They said, "You are free to finish my book or not as you prefer, but not to finish it thinking that such an action will help solve your difficulties would not work. For in that regard, you are simply deciding to cut down on value fulfillment further and to limited expression, while the limitation of expression is a part of the problem. Expression is not the problem. A fear of expression is." Rob noted, "Exactly, I might add. Therefore, how could publication of the next Seth book help?" They said, "The creative abilities again can help provide the necessary psychological motion and direction. They have in large regard in the past, but they have not gone far enough. They have not gone far enough because Ruber did not come to terms with his private version of the sinful self, and therefore still kept himself open to all of the negative conditioning that is so involved there, a conditioning that views all creative expression with distrust. Ruber was not responsible for his mother's reality, for her characteristics, reactions, or beliefs. He was not responsible for her marriage, its breakup, for his mother's illness again, or for the entire tragedy that he sees as his mother's life. He acted toward her according to his own understanding the best that he could. He does not need to punish himself in any way for any actions or any omissions in that relationship. This does not mean he could not have acted better in any particular instance, perhaps, for that can be said about almost anyone. Ruber chose his environment. Ruber chose his parents for his own lifetime. He was born in the right place at the right time. Now, in that larger light, even the concept of the sinful self has its reason, for it is once again shared by millions of people for centuries. Ruber set out to shut it down. Rob noted, "I grinned at this. Isn't that a rather large undertaking?" They said, "That concept will be changed, because many people in your society and in your times were indeed burned with the same intent, and in their private and public lives they are tackling that issue. The mass reality is ready for such a change. In the past, the sinful self-idea was so a part of Ruber's conditioning that it set up an entire framework of behavior. The need to justify life through writing, the exaggerated need for protection from the deceptive, unconscious, and the unsafe world, and the concept itself were so involved with his entire thinking patterns that he could not isolate it to see where and how it bore upon his activities. Now we can separate those strands. Those beliefs to some extent or another appear without their strong religious connotations in your own life and background also. And this will also be discussed in the series. The idea of Ruber's book. Rob noted, on rationalism. Say said is a good one because it represents creative impetus, undertaken, however, in the light of newer understanding, and I will have more to say concerning that issue. End of session. Rob asked, "One question?" Say said, "You may." Rob asked, "What do you think about the idea of one step at a time with the typing table each day?" Say said, "An excellent suggestion." Rob asked, "Can you give him a suggestion that will help him with the table and going to the drum?" Say said, "Leave things as they are for a day or so. Then I will have more to say in a day or so." Rob said, "Okay." Say said, "A fond good evening." Rob said, "Thank you very much," says good night.